So you chose to focus on 4 specific men while you, in this book. Why did you choose those 4?
These 4 took decisions that they knew would shape the destiny of the country. They knew it would produce a backlash or high costs, but they proceeded to do it anyway.
What do you think we should be taking away from all 4 of these men, and especially because they are so different from each other?
It's a very interesting point because they're ideologically different. But what unifies them is their view of their responsibilities as prime minister. They have very similar views of leadership. Leadership requires you to make decisions, not to defer them or wait for your successors to do it. Leadership requires you to explain your policies. If you're ahead of your country, if you're ahead of your public, you assume the responsibility of being the leader by trying to bring them around to what you think is necessary. Leadership requires putting the country first, not your politics first.
You wrote that Jewish survival requires not surrendering character by denying other people its rights. Is Israel doing this right now?
Well, I think the Israeli position right now is still to be determined. The Palestinians are divided between the West Bank and Gaza. They're divided between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. There's a disagreement not just psychologically, not just physically. There's a disagreement in terms of principles. Hamas doesn't believe there should be a two-state outcome. The Palestinian Authority, at least at this point, still commits to it, but isn't willing to negotiate unless the Israelis meet certain preconditions. So there's a reality here. 2 states is not available anytime soon. But if Israel keeps building outside what I call the settlement blocks, or to the east of the security barrier, which is about between 5 and 8% of the West Bank closest to what is known as the Green Line, or the June 467 lines, if Israel keeps building outside those areas, where there are now 104,000 Israelis who live, you will reach a point where the populations are so commingled that you won't be able to create separation. The moment you can no longer create separation, you have 1 state. And when you have 1 state, then you have a choice. Do you have 1 law that is the same for everybody, or do you create 2 different classes of citizens? Israel hasn't confronted that yet, but if it stays on the path it's on, it will.
Why are you supporting the 2-state solution rather than just making it 1 state?
Because you have 2 national movements competing for the same space. These are 2 separate national identities. They will never be satisfied if they don't have their own state. When you look around the Middle East, any place where you have more than 1 identity, whether it's national, tribal, ethnic, what you find is that state is at war. So if you want to ensure a perpetual conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, you'll create 1 state. Because each side with a separate identity will somehow feel the need to have that separate identity expressed.
Has Israel been maintaining the status quo for too long?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen, people have gotten used to that reality. Now, I understand. If you're an Israeli and you're looking at the region, what do you see? Well, you see 130,000 Hezbollah rockets. You see the Iranians trying to put precision guidance capabilities on those Hezbollah rockets. Israel, you're a small country geographically. You have a limited number of very high-value targets, militarily and economic targets. That's an existential threat. So if you're an Israeli and you're looking at what are the threats all around you, you say, why should I take a risk? You know, a Palestinian state there could be a failed state. It could bring in Hamas or ISIS or worse. So I understand the instinct. And that, by the way, that threat is very tangible, but also a threat to your identity. Even if it's abstract, sooner or later it will become real.
You wrote in the book, Israel has had leaders willing and able to rise to the moment that these leaders did not retreat in the face of daunting challenges. Are you worried that a leader like Netanyahu might?
Well, let's put it this way. At this point, the kind of choices that need to be made are not being made.
Why do you think that the right wing hasn't changed their tune on Palestinian statehood like Rabin and Sharon did?
It is interesting that both Rabin and Sharon, who had very different attitudes for a long time, came to the conclusion that they had to change. I would say the right wing in Israel today first denies there's a problem. They try to explain away demographics. So they try instead, their position is, well, we don't have to have a Palestinian state and we don't have to give them equal rights. We can give them limited autonomy and they'll accept that. And so they convince themselves that that's a future that's possible. The problem with it is severalfold. First, the Palestinians who, in my mind, have adopted a kind of self-destructive posture historically because their posture is always one of defiance. Even when there's been opportunities, the answer has been to defy, to stand up, to say no. So that meant they lost opportunities in the past. But I would take it even beyond that. It's not just that they won't accept limited autonomy. It's the rest of the world isn't going to accept this. And even in the United States, as I said, if there's one state and Palestinians start to say, okay, one person, one vote, equal rights, that will resonate in the United States. That will make BDS look like child's play. So I think here the right wing just completely underestimates the impact of that. They operate on an assumption that A, the Palestinians will simply surrender, and B, the rest of the world will get used to this. And the reality, I'm afraid, is both those are wrong.
You've worked in numerous administrations from both parties. What has been the reason, you think, for such a shift from such bipartisan support to it starting to change?
Yeah. You know, there's no easy answer to that question other than the fact that the Trump administration is different. Not just in this area. Across the board, the Trump administration is different. It's different from its Republican predecessors. It has adopted a position. I mean, to be fair, I think the idea of trying to promote peace was something that they have an interest in, but they have gone about it in a way where they have been one-sided to the extent that they recognize Israeli symbolic needs, but they don't recognize any Palestinian symbolic needs.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.